Welcome to Shardcast. Welcome to the Shardcast. Welcome to Shardcast. We are Shardcast. What is Shardcast? Shardcast is a bunch of mega fans who do content about American best-selling novelist Brandon Sanderson. If you haven't heard it, you are in the wrong place for that, because we're going to go so deep. This is going to be the deepest depths to ever deep. But we do podcasts, we do art, we do other things dedicated to Brandon stuff. And today we're gonna talk about some Wind and Truth things that you probably know about because you've seen both the thumbnail and the title of this video. But we're gonna do the YouTube thing where we're not gonna tell you what we're gonna talk about until we introduce ourselves. Starting with David.
I am Windrunner on the forums, and have at least one thing in common with the subject of this video. Windrunner thing? Anyway.
I was like, gender?
Yeah, no. Well, yeah, that's it. Well, yeah, probably more than one. But anyway, that's me.
Okay. Moving on to Grace.
I'm thegatorgirl, and for this intro, I will be playing the voice of Eric. Argent, why don't you just stick to the normal intro script?
Shut up, Eric. Shut up, Eric. This is my show now.
You're welcome, Eric. I know you're thinking it while you're editing.
Okay. And now we're going to pass the ball on to Jessie!
Hello, I'm Lady Lameness on the forums and Discord.
My energy was not matched. Let's try this again. We're going to pass the ball to Ella!
Woo!
There it is.
I think I got too much over this. Yes, hi, I'm Rasarr, and I can't stop laughing at this intro for some reason.
Excellent. We gotta get the energy up.
That's a good intro.
Yeah. And I think I was supposed to say I'm Evgeni at the beginning, and now I say, and I'm Argent. So I will learn how to do intros one day, but this one day is not this day. So
we got there.
Intro done. You know who we are. We know who we are. We know who you are. Let's talk about Wind and Truth. Obviously, spoilers about Wind and Truth. Also spoilers for, honestly, anything that's like Cosmere stuff. If you are watching this kind of when the episode comes out, the most recent Cosmere book is Wind and Truth. If you are watching this months in the future, I don't know, maybe Emberdark's out. But we're not going to talk about Emberdark. We're going to talk about Wind and Truth and everything else in the Cosmere. So, what we are going to be talking about specifically, obviously, spoilers, click away, hi, bye. What we are going to be talking about is Sigzil, a.k.a. Nomad, a.k.a. Zellion, a.k.a. I think that's the extent of his names.
So far.
The Sunlit Man.
So far.
But we are talking about him mostly in his capacity as a Stormlight character. We're going to talk about kind of his character arc. We're going to talk about his spren. We're going to talk about his other spren. We're going to talk about his friends and the people he looks up to, and his enemies, and his plot in Wind and Truth, and what he does well and what he doesn't do so well. And then we're going to do some like miscellanea, like he gets a unique character icon or chapter icon. We'll mention that. So that's kind of what we have on the dock for this episode. So we'll start things off by just kicking off into Sigzil's character arc, both kind of throughout the first arc of the Stormlight archive. Doesn't seem like he's going to be around for the second arc because he went off into the Cosmere. But also more specifically, we're going to talk about his arc within Wind and Truth, right? So does anyone want to give us kind of a high-level recap of, I was going to say Kaladin's, which is funny, Sigzil's journey throughout these, like very high notes throughout these first 5 books?
I suppose I can give it a try with some of you, like amending whenever I miss something.
Yeah, we're going to heckle you.
Excellent. You do that. So, Sigzil... Ooh. Okay, starting off.
Yes, let's boo. We're starting off on the right booing Sigzil.
So, Sigzil backstory. He's from Azimir. He once attempted to apply to join like the higher corps there, but couldn't because despite looking like a meritocracy, Azimir does require you to have some money if you want to get anywhere in life. At some point, he becomes an apprentice to Hoyd. Then Hoyd ditched him in the Shattered Plains, where he became one of the Bridgerunner slaves.
And when
That's
he's
where
Hoyd's apprentice, he's becoming a world singer.
World
Different
singer.
from World Bringer,
From world
which is
bringer,
which
but-
is the Scadrian kind of thing.
Yeah, Scadrian thing, but like a storyteller, like that's kind of the thing he's sort of learning at Hoyd's side, somewhat unsuccessfully.
So he eventually, Hoyd was training him, but then he dumped him on the Shattered Plains. Sigzil became a bridge runner, ended up in Bridge 4 with Kaladin and co. Was initially not part of the group that liked Kaladin, if I remember right.
Well, to be fair, there was no such group to begin with, because no one liked Kaladin barging in
True,
at
but
6
he
a.m.
was-
and going, "Hey, let's work out."
But I think he
You're-
was
you're
one of the
correct.
holdouts.
You're correct. No, he was a longer detractor. He was saying Kaladin was giving them hope that was not ultimately, he was not going to be able to do anything for them ultimately. It would be false hope. So he was not necessarily like, even when he went along with things, he was still kind of, I don't know about this.
He wasn't the rocks and the thefts of the band. He was closer to the Moashes of the band.
Yeah, so eventually, over time, he becomes kind of the science guy of the Bridge 4. And he's the one that oversees the first experiments with, like, how do Kaladin's powers work? How can he use them? How long does Stormlight last? That kind of stuff. Then, eventually, he becomes one of Kaladin's squires. He does become one of those, like, officers of Bridge 4 when it becomes a sort of free military unit. And he does also eventually become a Windrunner of his own, bonding Vienta, who we will talk about later a lot.
Like just like other details along the way, he does struggle at first, I believe, to become a squire. Like I think he's got an Oathbringer chapter in that kind of Bridge 4 section where he wants to be able to draw in Stormlight, like isn't able to, and is kind of struggling with that, and like wondering where he'll fit in if he doesn't, like if he isn't ultimately able to learn how to do it, and kind of is always struggling with his place as, is he a scholar? Like, can he be the soldier when he kind of feels like he's still that kid that was studying to be kind of a scribe in Azir?
Yeah, so that kind of continues because eventually when Kaladin resigns as the leader of Bridge 4, he names Sigzil as the new leader. And Sigzil kind of has to take on that mantle of like being the guy in charge and then being the guy in charge of the defense on the Shattered Plains in Wind and Truth. And eventually, once the planes are lost to the listeners, he ends up getting visited by Hoyd, who's been kind of avoiding him up until that point, and gets handed over the shard. No, not the shard, the down shard that Hoyd was wielding. He departs Rasarr because he's holding the Dawn Shard, and he meets up with the Spren that will eventually become known as Orcs.
And by that stage, he has held the Dawn Shard for a little bit, and he's starting to feel the effects of that. He doesn't feel like he's changing. He feels like he doesn't need to eat. The Dawn Shard is kind of sustaining him. Things like that.
Which shard is it again?
Exist.
Yes. Unclear how we should be referring to Dawn Shards, but the command of this one seems to be exist in the same way that the command of Reasons seems to be change or remake or something to that effect. So that's Sigzil's story. Where I want to start this off, and we're going to go into Wind and Truth for in just a moment. I am curious to find out how people felt about Sigzil prior to Wind and Truth. What did we think about him as a character? Did we have any kind of theories about where his arc was going to go. Obviously, once we saw Sunlit Man, we kind of knew that there were some things that needed to happen in Wind and Truth or post Wind and Truth to get him to Sunlit Man place. But I wonder, like, you know, did we have any thoughts about him, or was he like one of the Laytons and Scars of Bridge 4, who's just kind of there?
I wouldn't say he was one of like the Laytons and Scars, but he was like, there are like tiers to Bridge 4 characters, right? You've got Kaladin at the top, then you've got like your Lopens and Rocks, then you've got your Laytons and so on. And then you have the group that you read the name of and you wonder if it's one of the guys who died in Way of Kings.
Good old maps.
And yeah, to me, Sigzil is on like that second tier in the same place as like Lopen and Rock, in that he is a character that appears a lot more often than others and has his own like background thing going on that's interesting from a lore standpoint, but doesn't get much importance to the actual plot at hand.
I would agree with that. Like, I would put Sigzil at about the same level as Rock and Taff in terms of the hierarchy of Bridge 4 of who is known and who is not known.
Kind of the officers.
Yeah, like the characters that stick out and like the ones that Brandon is trying to make stick out. I quite like Sigzil before Wind and Truth, largely because he wasn't what he was in Wind and Truth. Like listening to Alla go through the history of him really made me realize how much of like almost like a Renaissance man he is, and that he has such this broad background, and then he just ends up in this leadership soldier position in the end. And he was so much more fun when he was a scientist who was also like struggling to be this wannabe poet, story writer, and also like all of his melancholy about the world and with Kaladin. Like that was interesting to me compared to what we got. So I found him a lot more interesting before Wind and Truth.
I will say that I know we're not getting too much into post Wind and Truth stuff, but we do know from Sunlit Man that he will go on to kind of like spend some time with a group of Arcanists in the future and kind of spend more time doing that stuff. And there is Sunlit Man stuff where he's doing, he's kind of working on engineering their engines and whatnot, where I do think that he ultimately kind of ends up gravitating back towards that. And we're kind of seeing him at a point where he's like, maybe like a little bit outside his comfort zone, being a military leader. I think we see a lot of that in this story.
Yeah, that's a circle background.
Yeah, but I would say that going into this book, I mean, I always enjoyed Sigzil. I think that I really enjoyed Sunlit Man for the most part, and that really kind of kicked him into like an upper tier of where I was really excited to see what was going to happen in this book. And I would say that I had at least like a little bit of an expectation going into it, just kind of the way he sort of reflects on his past in Sunlit Man, that I believed that there would be some sort of that he'd be put in charge in a big way, and that something bad was going to happen. Like that was kind of my expectation. And I thought maybe it would be something that he had been involved in, but that he essentially had rejected the military and was rejecting leadership and kind of some of those Windrunner-y ideals.
There was an implication of like a personal failure that resulted in a great tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm a bit of an outlier in that Sigzil was never really the most memorable to me. He was always just sort of there with the other bridgemen. I don't really know why, but I guess just what he was doing was never really like stuck out super strongly to me as like, this is someone to notice. And I definitely did not picture him as like the person who would be in charge of the Windrunners once Kaladin and Teft were both like out of commission. That never really like clocked me as like, this is the person who will take that role based on how he was written.
That particular bit is a little bit tricky because like I don't see like leaving a Rhythm of War and going into Wind and Truth, and like finding out, oh, okay, Kaladin's is retiring, great. Okay, so who's going to be left in charge of the Windrunners? And it's like, it's not going to be Lopen. Let me tell you that. It's not going to be Rock.
So for me, and I know you guys put this character in a tier lower, but for me it was always Scar who I thought that would have that role, because when you go back and reread his Oathbringer stuff, it's very much, and he ends up, I guess, in sort of like the trainer position, which also sort of makes sense with what he's doing. But he's in that position of like noticing people's struggles and really encouraging them to be Windrunners. And he's also one of the ones who goes to Kholinar with, that group. So in my mind, Scar was always like a very prominent Windrunner and seemed poised to potentially take up that leadership role if there was ever the vacuum.
I think for me, he was always the sergeant, in the same way that like Deft was always the sergeant. So like, someone who's not going to lead, but he's going to be there next to the leader and like taking care of things.
And he's named second in Rhythm of War. But I think there is kind of a change up in this one where he steps even further. No, maybe not back, but he steps into the training role, right? And then Lopen is elevated.
I think so. Yeah. Or like he certainly doesn't want to leave his position as like a trainer. That's just
And if Scar is like, yes, like this is what I like doing, I'm really good at training the new recruits, like this is the role I'm like choosing to take instead of potentially trying to take up the leadership position, that's totally fine. I respect that, but I just think he was always the one that in my mind was more on track to do that than Sigzil ever was.
Sure. Welcome to Scarcast.
That'll be 2028, Argent. Okay.
How do I feel about Sigzil? I think, Jess, as you were speaking, there were neurons were firing in my head and were making connections. There is something to the idea of... So the Wind and Truth arc for Sigzil is very much the scholar with the spear, right? That's very overt in the text. Like that's the whole point. And I think it's interesting to see his journey up to Wind and Truth be more scholar than spear, right? He's the nerd of Bridge 4. And obviously he's a capable fighter, but when you think about Sigzil, you are imagining kind of the scientist of the group, right? He is the one who's trying to figure out Kaladin's surges. He's the one who's asking questions. He's the one who's being persnickety about, ration, or not necessarily rations, but like quartermaster stuff, supplies, things like that. And then Wind and Truth thrusts him in a leadership position that he then, correctly or not, interprets as also a kind of a individual fighter position. Like Wind and Truth puts him in Kaladin's shoes, right? But without Kaladin's arc up until that. So like Sigzil's arc has been very different. Sigzil, Way of Kings to Wind and Truth has been very different from Kaladin, Way of Kings to Wind and Truth, right? Kaladin's arc has always been balancing leadership and protection and like personal fighting prowess to a supernatural level, right? Sigzil has not been that. And so we're not fast forwarding his arc to a place where Kaladin is. Sigzil has been on a different track, and we are now bumping him off of that track, and we are putting him on the Kaladin track, and he's clearly the wrong fit for it. I think this is not I haven't voiced this opinion, but I don't think it's controversial. Like Kaladin just made a mistake by putting Sigzil in charge, because this is not when Sigzil thinks about the scholar with the spear. That's not what Kaladin was envisioning when he was putting him in charge, I think. And this is informed. Maybe I just lied earlier when I said we should save Sunlit Man for later, because I keep wanting to come back to it. But like this is informed by what we see in Sunlit Man, where Sigzil is much more of a Kaladin than he is in this book. He is a personally very capable fighter. there is a bit of the leadership stuff, like he organizes the Beaconites and stuff. And he's he's not all about protection, but like protection is a lot of like what drives him in that book. And he is sciencing the crap out of stuff so like that is so I guess what I'm trying to say is Kaladin thought Sigzil was going to be kind of a leader who is a scientist, and Sigzil bought into that. He believed it in Wind and Truth. In reality, what ended up happening by the time we see him in Sunlit Man as Zelian is his flavor of that was a scientist who is a like individual warrior kind of, and not necessarily a leader. It is interesting to like reframe his because hey, spoiler alert, on average this episode doesn't love Sigzil in Wind and Truth. And so it's interesting to like reframe that 3-part journey of Stormlight 1 to 4, Stormlight 5, Sunlit Man as, hey, that middle bit was Kaladin messing up and putting Sigzil in the spot that he's not supposed to be in. And it took him until Sunlit Man. It took Sigzil until Sunlit Man to like course correct and find his place.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I definitely think that there's a part of Sigzil in this book that feels a little jarring to me, in that I feel like he kind of takes Kaladin's place and he becomes action hero Kaladin, where he is like he is suddenly a very capable fighter. And I know that sometimes he's saying, oh, maybe these aren't the best fused or whatever. But, we see him lose to Leshwi, he is kind of commented upon as not being their best. Like he's kind of the scholar guy. And in this book, he is like taking down multiple of the Nixum, like he is really
not the Nixum, but yeah.
At least maybe I'm recalling incorrectly, but I think he fought at least one or two at the same time. Like he fights a few of the Husk ones.
Oh, that's okay.
I could be, maybe I'm misremembering, but at least I recall that.
I was remembering the focused ones, but sure, he does take down highly capable combatants kind of on the regular.
Mm-hmm. So that was a little jarring to me. I think that the question of whether Kaladin made a mistake is a really interesting one. And I would disagree that Kaladin made a mistake that I don't like so cards and table. My expectation and my great disappointment for this book is that I thought Sigzil was going to make a big leadership error that would get people killed, and that would cause the man that we see in Sunlit Man, because he would be angry that that'd be why he would feel so unsuitable to leadership, because he had decided to do something that had backfired. And in this book, I don't think that happens at all. We see a guy who is put in an impossible situation, like literally an impossible situation, where he's got none of the advantages he's expected to rely on: infinite stormlight from Dalinar, plenty of support through the Oath Gates, all of his Windrunners. Like he is being weakened on every level, facing an Everstorm, new few. Like when you like lay it all out, like he was put in a no-win situation, and he does a very good job, and ultimately succeeds in getting the least bad outcome, as kind of unrealistic as I believe that would actually work out that way. That's an aside. But anyway, like it does work out relatively well. And so he's just a guy who Kaladin did him a disservice in that he handed him an impossible situation, and something horrible happened to Sigzil during that situation. But Sigzil did a good job. And I think that if this had not been, I don't think that Sigzil's like inherent like inclination is towards leadership. You know what I mean? Like he's clearly got his scholarship side. He's clearly got his inventive side. But I think that people get put in positions sometimes, and they just find it, and they just grow into that position. And even if maybe it's not their calling, they can be very successful there and do well. And he finds that spot within his arc in this book where he is feeling very successful. He's found that balance. And if his friend hadn't been killed, if he'd been able to get away and everything had been fine, I think he would have ultimately been okay. I think that was kind of the moment that broke him and sent him down a different path. So he suffered a trauma, and he ended up walking away from it. But I don't think there was a personal failing or anything that he did wrong that led to it. He just couldn't have succeeded.
Yeah. And I don't think I disagree with that. When I say that Kaladin made a mistake, I mean that more in a personal character level than a strategic. So like Sigzil didn't do a bad job in the position that Kaladin put him in. I think Kaladin for Sigzil's own character and long-term development and his calling, which I think you correctly called, that was the wrong call, right? I think Sigzil just doesn't want to be a leader. And he can do a fine job at being a leader, but that's not.
I guess I just believe in I don't believe in callings ultimately. I think you have inclinations, but I think he had an inclination, but he would have found a way to do his scholarship stuff and been a leader. There's even a mention that he's oh, the experiments are happening. I'm just not there right now because we're fighting. In other times he would be. I think he would have continued to have that aspect to himself. But I just don't think. I would disagree as well that his calling had to have been to be a scholar, I guess, or to have been more a tinkerer or an inventor.
I will say, I think I have a lot more negative opinion on this arc than either of you two, because I don't think it's Kaladin who made the mistake in universe, because like David said, Sigzil did a fine job of it, as good as you possibly could in this situation. But I do think that Brandon kind of bought into the idea that Sigzil is a action hero leader character a bit too much.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is like you said before, Argent, this is not going to be a very Sigzil positive episode. But the character arc that Sigzil has on the Shattered Plains is the Azimir defense arc, but worse. And I think Brandon tried to kind of fit Sigzil into this mold of a leader character, but Sigzil is just not. Just in my opinion, Sigzil as a character doesn't really work in this role. So the story ends up getting kind of contrived to make him look like he's very smart and brilliant to figure out this plan. With you even have those generals, whatever their names are, telling him, "Oh, this could actually work. It's such a clever plan." And splitting your forces 4 ways is considered a work of tactical genius on Sigzil's part.
Well, I see what Brandon was trying to do there. He was trying to say,
I just don't think he did it well.
I don't disagree.
This is the thing.
Yeah.
I think if I have so many different thoughts of how this could have gone, but I think if Sigzil had come up with a solution that came from his background as a scholar and as a scientist, that would have worked a lot better for me, because it would have tied into who he is and how he thinks, instead of this militaristic thinking and tactical choice that they went down that path in the end. But I actually think I agree with both Evgeni and with David. I
That's
really
not
like
possible.
this idea.
We are on the opposite
That-
sides of this argument. You were sitting on a fence.
I'm going to sit on the fence then. I like the idea that Kaladin made a mistake. I agree with that idea. I do not think that Sigzil should have been put into this role. I do think the role he was put into was anyone would have failed in it. No one was going to win. And what I think would have tied together who Sigzil was before Wind and Truth and who he is in Sunlit Man, to get some of that leadership, some of those leadership skills coming through, and learning some of that, but also getting that personal failing, is if he had some sort of failing that actually happened, and if something really bad happened because it was his fault. And I think that would have tied things together so much better than what we got. He needed to fail. He needed to not have even the best that he could do in that situation, I think. I think the situation needed to be more tenable to win, and then for him to fail anyway because
Yeah,
he's
that's-
just not meant to be in that role.
Yeah,
And I think you're right. I think Kaladin made a mistake by putting him in that role.
yeah, that is kind of what I was trying and probably failing to convey earlier. That like, I think Brandon kind of bought into the idea that Sigzil is leadershiping well a bit too much, and like made him do as well as possibly could, which kind of muddles the whole idea that Sigzil is not meant for this kind of role and that Kaladin made a mistake. Because, there was no way anyone could win this, so Sigzil is not a worse choice than anyone else. And Sigzil doesn't end up failing in a leadership role. He ends up failing because the Edgelord Supreme of Rasarr has happened to get in his way. And even then, like, he still gets the best outcome possible.
I think for me, the reason this kind of falls flat is that it almost seems like you have to dumb down everyone else on the Shattered Plains. Like, it feels like a lot of other people on the Shattered Plains were dumbed down to make Sigzil's arc work. Like, he's the one that comes up with this, like, genius, groundbreaking plan to, try and protect all 4 plateaus and then, like, slowly let the fused win. But he's with generals who have been fighting wars for a really long time. And there's also kind of things with the plan at the end, with the treaty with the listeners, where it's like he comes up with this brilliant plan that no one else sees coming, even though maybe like they should have. It just kind of feels to me like whether or not he was put in this place incorrectly, a lot of it doesn't work because it feels like one there's not really any other characters on the Shattered Plains who matter besides like him, Venli, Elle, and maybe like Dammy, whatever his name is.
Dummy.
Dummy. I forget Dummy.
Your throne.
The Stormwall. Yeah, and it's like there's a bunch of he's just surrounded by a bunch of like very forgettable generals who don't seem to know what they're doing.
Isn't one of them?
And I feel like
yeah, General Win.
Yeah, General Win.
It feels like that's sort of why it's like, why are these people put in charge of this offensive if it's this like new guy who has never been in charge of leadership before who's coming up with all of these genius strategies?
I want to push back against something. I love a dunk fest as much as anyone else. That's a lie. I don't love dunk fests. I don't mind a dunk fest as much as anyone else. I don't think the book is trying to present Sigzil as a genius. And that doesn't invalidate anything that you are trying to say here. But I think the book is also trying to say, Sigzil is trying to like survive a week-long siege. And he is like throwing his best ideas at the wall and at the fused. And so like they are sometimes presented as good ideas within the context of this needs to last a week. So just want to like lower the IQ of how he's being presented here a little bit.
I don't think he's being presented as a genius. And like to a certain extent that feels like part of the problem, because I just think that like, okay, he's throwing these ideas at the wall, but it's very much like why isn't any of the people who have been doing this for their entire career coming up with anything substantial as well?
Because it's an impossible situation.
I get like what Grace means is like he's surrounded by a bunch of characters who should be characters and instead are just reaction soundboards to Sigzil, because like he's coming up with all the plans instead of these people whose job should be to come up with these plans. So like he ends up being the only character of relevance, aside from like Venli, Vienta, Moash.
It's like it has to be Sigzil that comes up with the plan. It can't be anyone around him because Sigzil has to be the main character in this section. But Sigzil is also the new guy on the block who doesn't have the experience behind him. So it is a little bit unbelievable that he's the one who's always coming up with the plan that kind of saves everything, instead of it being some sort of even just a collaborative thing with his generals around him to include them as characters at the very least, instead of them just kind of existing in the background.
Sure, and I agree with that. I am, just because I think this has been like the third time that he has been framed by, like, I think multiple people on the episode as being presented as a genius. That is specifically like the bit that I want to. Everything else, I agree. Correct. Yes. He is the main character. He is John Stormlight Jr. in this scene or in this arc. Just framing.
Mm-hmm. I think that part of it too is that, like, if we're being honest, Brandon is running up against what he maybe possibly should fit in the book. Like, there is just, like, you know, this is like, should this plotline exist? Should this be a novella that Brandon writes in the gap between Stormlight if it's a story he wants to tell? I know he's probably using it to some degree to balance slower scenes, to have action scenes. Like, that's probably a part of it. But, you know, you're not like, and a number of characters have died. That's another thing too, is a lot of our secondary cast has been killed over the course of the books. You know, like the kind of Downers generals have all been wiped out like several times. And so we don't get to have any characters that were like, oh, it's Talib from Way of Kings. Like, we know Talib, you know, like that, those guys are dead. And like their replacements have also died. So there, I think that also leads to some of it being a little hollow, where you're just like, oh, and now we've got these generals we've never heard of who don't do anything. Like, I think that's part of the problem. I do agree that, like, the weakness of the plot is just that the plan doesn't make any sense, because it's very simple. If you capture the two plateaus, the Oathgate and the main one, it's game over for the humans. The other ones don't matter. And so if you're splitting your forces up, you know, Sigzil's got his fun bridge metaphor about, like, you want to have failure points. Like, Brandon is clearly trying to tie it to him as a character. I don't think it's that successful. Like, he's trying to be like, oh, his engineering mindset is like, it's causing him to think about things differently. But I think it's kind of very, very shallow. It just doesn't really work. And so it doesn't, so like it's undermining characters like Elle, who I think would know very clearly things like, don't get off the plateau. And like, if we capture the Oathgate, they can't get reinforcements. Like, there's a whole scene where he explains why the Fused won't actually go for the Oathgate, because it's pointless for them to go for the Oathgate. And then later, reinforcements of Stormlight come through the Oathgate. And I'm like, and that's the reason they would have gone for the Oathgate. You know, like, that doesn't make sense. And so that's kind of part of the problem. And I think it also goes back to the structure of the book, which is something that we've talked about, where, you know, it's got to last for 6 days. And so we need to have things that happen in the book to mark the progress of time, so it feels like things are happening. And so we've got to have the 4 plateaus, so that the 3 plateaus, so that the first 2 plateaus can fall, so we can get to the climax. And it's kind of just a construct of that.
It's also funny that one of the first things, if not the first thing, during the battle for Thaylen Field was Odium commanding the Tisarch to go take over the Oathgate.
Yeah, it's important.
In terms of just Sigzil's plotline in general, I don't think this is going to be a hot take, but I think the whole thing could have been cut. And it was only there because we needed something to tie in Sunlit Man. And the way it was done felt more forced than anything. And whether it would have worked, I don't know if it would have worked as a novella, just because of how it needed to fit within the 10-day structure, or the 6-day structure in this case. But the way that it was put into the book just felt like it was being added in because it had to be there for something else, instead of because the plot was overly relevant to the actual story that was being told. And I think some of the things that we do get on the Shattered Plains that tie into other stories, like the stuff with Venli, could pretty easily be tied in somewhere else. Like, it doesn't need to be tied in with Sigzil's story specifically. And I didn't mind Sigzil's story that much, but at the same time, I think if there was a way to cut down the word count in this book, it would be to cut out Sigzil's storyline.
Yeah, I think this is a piece of critique that we've offered a couple of times or a few times now in different episodes. Kind of the idea that the 10-day structure maybe not forces, but incentivizes Brandon to give everyone kind of an arc throughout the book, and not only an arc, but an arc that has stuff happening every single day, right? And so it can feel for some of these characters that we are inventing scenes for them just so that they have a scene in day 4 and they have a scene in day 5 and they have a scene in day 6, right? I think a couple of times now we've said that, oh, if this character had just like skipped a day here and a day there. So like, you know, we see the start of the battle for the Shattered Plains, and, you know, we go through a couple of days or whatever, and then we skip a day or two and we come back and it's like Sigzil is weary and worn out, and he's like, well, hey, we've been doing this for like 3 days with no sleep. Everyone is just asleep on their feet. Maybe. Like I can see the vision for that. I think we've said similar things about like, oh, Dalinar and Navani, why do we need to do vision? We can just skip a little bit. Shallan, why do we need to follow Dalinar and Navani doing vision, right? So yeah, I can see that. I don't know if this could have been cut entirely. I think that feels wrong to me. In large part because I think we needed a story for the Shattered Plains, right? The entire book, the idea is, hey, we've got these essentially 3 strongholds on Rasarr that the good guys are holding, right? We've got Urithiru, we've got Azimir, and we got Thalina and the Shattered Plains. So I guess 4, right? We have to resolve, like Odium is going to want to take these. We have to resolve that. And so your options are, you can compact some of these things. The attack on the Shattered Plains could have happened any day. Like the fact that the fused army arrived on day 4 or whatever is arbitrary. Brandon can just choose for them to arrive on day 7. That was an option. But like that had to happen in some capacity.
And maybe that would have been, I don't know, like we're just sort of spitballing here, but maybe that could have given it like a cool, distinct feel where, you know, Azimir is this grueling siege, but then we go to the Shattered Plains and it's like, all right, we have more time to get ready, and then it culminates in like one big battle. That could have been a cool thing. Like, I don't know. That could have been cool though.
Mm-hmm.
And
like having the contrast between them instead of having 2 things that were really similar.
It would help to distinguish it from the Azimir plotline a lot more. And I feel also maybe, because like the Sigzil plotline is theoretically supposed to be both the Sigzil and Venli plotline, because they do end up, you know, they end up having the same resolution together. But the Venli plotline is also a lot of just Venli walking around. And
it is literally her walking in the chasms for 2 days.
Yeah, so I feel like maybe giving, you know, cutting some of that Shattered Plains defense time and giving Venli more stuff to do would have helped this plotline as well.
I can see that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. My favorite parts were the parts when they weren't fighting. Like I think a little bit of it is too a little bit of an overload of Windrunner combat on my part, which I generally like. But, you know, a lot of the scenes are fighty, and I'm just like, oh, when they're doing the non-fighty stuff, that's when I'm most interested in this plot right now.
I know after the book came out, a lot of people were saying, like, part of why they liked Venli's chapter so much is because it felt like a return to sort of Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, where it's just like, these are people exploring the chasms, and Sigzil had a really cool opportunity to do that, where he was part of the bridge crews, and maybe you spend less time doing Windrunner fighting and more time using Sigzil to kind of go back to that sort of vibe of like, and it's difficult because he is a Windrunner, so you're never gonna have like the exact same sort of bridge run style fighting anymore. But I think there is a way where you could have maybe integrated that sort of back to Way of Kings or Words of Radiance vibe into his story more, and I think people would have liked it a lot more then.
Oh, you know what would have been fun? Sorry, and hey, listeners, viewers, I promise this is not Shardcast fixes Wind and Truth episode. I'm not trying to do that. None of us are trying to do that. But I just had an idea. I just shush. I just had an idea. So Venli runs into like a broken bridge down in the chasms and has like a little cute scene where she's like, oh, this used to be a symbol of death, but now it is overgrown with life. Interesting. Like she has a lot of these life and death duality moments in the chasms. An ex-bridgeman running into a bridge down in the chasms could have also been a fun scene to have, just like to be in Sigzil's head as he like reminisces about, the bridge runs. So that was one idea. The other idea that came to me as I was thinking about this idea was, hey, what if we turned the Shattered Plains plot, Shattered Plains in the background, into like a reverse Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, bridge runs thing, where so in the first two books, we had the humans running bridges and like essentially throwing their forces away to reach the center, to reach Narak. Well, first the tower and then Narak. What if we flipped that on its head and we now had the like Odium's forces do like essentially throw their forces away, throw their people away in like essentially suicide runs to reach Narak. And then we have Sigzil and his much less numerous humans, much in the same way that the singers were much less numerous than the humans for the first two books. What if they are like doing, maybe they're doing like engineering things to like so it's like this slow like retreat where Odium's forces are just being ground to dust as they try to. It sounds like a fun, or to me, it sounds like a fun reversal of the first two books that we could have had here.
You know what this made me think? Like, if we're definitely not talking about fixing this plot, but like we're talking about.
Okay. You get this one, and then we're going to move on.
What if I have one? I have one too.
All right, you get one, and then we're going to move on.
Okay. Is anyone else?
Enough.
Okay, so like we were talking about like Venli exploring the chasms, and like I'm starting to wish like Venli and Sigzil met earlier in this plotline, because one, they're both scholars, so like we could get some like two scholars talking to each other about sciences, especially since Venli was also studying Spren, if I remember correctly.
I mean, studying is a strong word, but yes, she was trying to discover new forms, and that involved work with Spren, yes.
Yeah, so, and the second thing is that it would let them, if they spend some time in the chasms together, it would let them establish a sort of rapport that would let the finale of them like working together to pull wool over Elle's eyes.
And she can smile anyway.
Maybe, hey. Yeah, but I think like this would work better because like right now as the book is, there is not really a connection to them except for like we both know Lane, right?
We love Lane.
Yeah, so they kind of are basically strangers who are banking on that shared connection and like having shared interests in not letting Elle win this battle.
I mean, to be fair, a common enemy is a good enough reason, but I hear you.
Imagine if they like had a common enemy, but also had several days of like exploring the chasms together finding out secrets about Rasarr in the chasms the way Venli ends up doing on her own. And that would let them bond so that this moment of, a listener and a human working together to defeat a fused would have more of an emotional weight.
Mm-hmm. I think Rasarr and I are thinking along similar lines, where I would like Sigzil and Venli to meet earlier, and then it solves the problem, at least in part of them not having much screen time too, is we can see them in each other's perspective, so they're both on screen more.
Yeah.
And I think that my thought was kind of, if we're just pitching stuff, they have a resource for the chasms. They've got, Brandon needs us to find the well of control this book too. That's also part of it. And I think that, they're both there. For some reason, they both know there's a power in the plateau, maybe that they can use that power to save them, and that's they can use that against Odium's forces, and that's their only chance. And they meet, or they're both looking, there's scholars, there's cool plateau ruins, there's all sorts of stuff you can do with that can lead them finding the perpendicularity. And I think that would be a bit interesting. But Brandon's the author, and this was, I think, not raising the bar on what I think he's capable of, which is something kind of my general critique.
I agree. I exercise my veto powers, and we're going to end the Shardcast Fixes Wind and Truth section of this here. And I will segue us into something else, which is so both of you, I think, correctly identified an issue with Sigzil's story in this book, in that he doesn't really have anyone to act against or with. He's kind of he's got the generals, and he's got Bridge 4 with him, but he's not really spending a lot of time. They have a couple of scenes, right? So throwing Venli into the mix for him to act with and be a character with could have been a lot of fun. I agree with that. But we did get something in that slot, and that was actually his spren, or his first spren, Vienta, who is we barely knew anything about her other than she existed. I think there's a line in Oathbringer or Rhythm of War, I think, where when they're talking about the expedition to lasting integrity, right?
It's her idea.
Yeah. Where Sigzil was like, oh, my spren thinks that this can happen. And they're also talking about why they can't send Windrunners on that mission. So we get a name for her. It's Vienta. And we get, lo and behold, a characterization for her. She's not some other spren. Some spren that we see are they are means for the characters to have access to powers. Other spren are Sil and Design and Pattern, who are very much characters in their own right. And now we get Vienta, who is, I think, somewhere in the middle.
She's kind of when I was talking earlier about this pyramid of Bridge 4 characters by importance. I think it's kind of similar with the spren, where at the top you have Sil and Pattern and Design, and at the bottom you have those spren that have names and nothing else. And Vienta is kind of on the same tier of Sigzil, where she has a name, a character trait, and a gimmick, basically.
That's a way to describe her. But I get it. Yeah, I see the point. So Vienta, what do we think about her? How do we feel about her?
Can I point something out first?
Yes.
Vienta means wind in Spanish.
Yes.
I remember Veronica pointing this out.
Yes. Which is something I have become acquainted because I am on social media and I see a lot of Viento y Verdad on
Yeah, I wonder what they translated it to.
Cool
Did they just
name.
come up with a different name, or are they just and this friend's name is this?
Wind.
Well,
Let us know, Spanish fans.
Fortunately, we have a Spanish copper mind.
Oh, that's true.
And that page has not been translated.
Hey, it's all volunteer work, folks.
It is.
Anyway,
please join us and help us edit the copper mind.
I don't think it's a critique to say that she's like a second tier spren though, because like that is proportionate to the character that Sigzil is. You know what I mean? Like that. Like if she was a really detailed, if we knew a ton about Vienta and nothing about Sigzil, that'd be very weird. You know. So like that's not really a knock against her in my mind. You know, like we're having to establish a character for this spren, you know, relatively quickly. I like that she's being represented as like not being your standard honor spren, you know, in that just that you want to get like a little more variety. Like they've kind of got the playful trait that you see a lot from them, or you have the very kind of more staid, honorable side, you know, and those are kind of the two types of honor spren you generally see people falling into. So I like people who stand out a little bit from that pattern. I think she does come across a little one note sometimes.
You do, and this is going to be only slightly tangential. You raise a valid point in saying that her, like the level of characterization that the spren gets has to be comparable to the level of characterization that the Radiant gets. And I was going to bring up Ox as an example to this. In the Sunlit Man, Nomad is obviously the main character, and Ox gets a ton of characterization as his spren. In this book, even though Zeth is a main character, I was going to say ostensibly, but we don't need to get in there. Zeth is a main character, but he's like one of 7 main characters, right? And so his spren, Ox, in Wind and Truth, just cannot get as much characterization as he does. And so that's I see it. That's a good point.
But at the same time, he still does get quite a bit of characterization in Wind and Truth. Like a lot of people seem to go from Ox, disliking him as a character to at the end quite liking who he is.
Yeah, and he does have a little bit of an arc, right? But it's nowhere near like his Sunlit level.
Oh
right?
Yeah, of course. But the fact that he has an arc at all, I think, says something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
He's
it's
more
needed
successful.
as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I actually think that his character arc is more successful than Sigzil's character arc in this to set up for Sunlit Man.
Rough.
I dislike Vienta. And a lot of that is just like how she is written does not feel genuine to how people I know who are like good at math and engineering actually like think and talk. It's just something about her just sort of takes me out of the story.
Counterpoint.
Yeah.
She's a spren. Like, I get what you're saying, and I agree. Like, human people don't think about, like, human people are not constantly like calculating wind speed and wind resistance and travel times and distances and things like that. She is a manifestation of a natural force. And so I think it is more acceptable because of that.
I mean, I didn't have to like enjoy reading it and think it was written well, though. I mean,
no, certainly, yes. I just want to separate from like enjoyment is separate from like believability, if that makes sense.
I think like look at like Pattern though, you know what I mean, who's in some ways is kind of a little bit inexplicable, you know what I mean? But like it's very he like his character moments are meaningful, you know what I mean? Like you do like he's clearly a different sort of person than your average human person, but like, you know, like you still have character arcs that like feel good and stuff. And I don't think Vienta, like, I don't know, she doesn't quite I think she feels a little more like I'm just gonna spitball like a math fact right now to remind you like that's my thing.
Yeah, Vienta just, she's not very much character. Like, I'm not sure how to put it. I just didn't find myself caring much for her. Like, she's cute, she has a gimmick, and she sure is one of the spren in this story.
Okay.
And I like that. I think the other part that's kind of hard is that like her other character trait is shy. And so then like that is also, it's just like a little kind of a harder thing to get to, like, that's one of her things where she's like likes to be kind of like wrapped up in the robes, and doesn't like appearing to show herself. And I think that like you can see maybe that there's like kind of like, she's very fearful of Moash and the knife, and like the concept of like not existing, like that's a thing that she kind of brings up quite a bit, and finds troubling. And she like stays with Sigzil at the end, when she could have fled, she could have been well away from there. Like she is there. Like I think there's, if you look at it, there are like things to appreciate there, but I just don't think it quite like rose to the level that it could have.
I'm going to add just a little bit more to that, in that I found it, I don't know, she doesn't fall quite to the level of a caricature to me. I'm like, yeah, obviously the math thing is kind of her like big defining trait. But I did find cute little moments in the way that in the way that she hides from everyone, and even from Sigzil most of the time. And then every now, I think a couple of times throughout Sigzil's chapters, like she and Sigzil would be out, like, they go and scout this Elsgate that where like Moash, because like the Dagonartha stuff, and they go and like she kind of loosens up a little bit, right? She becomes visible to him. I think there's one moment where she like unveils herself, which is really rare, shows kind of a moment of comfort and also a moment of vulnerability. So like there is stuff there. I get that it's not enough, and I agree that it's not enough. It is enough for me to want me to see more. So like there's a kernel of something there, and I can see that kernel, and it's intriguing to me, and I wish there had been more than a kernel, as opposed to, oh, this is nothing, right?
I think that's totally reasonable.
I would have been more fine with Vienta, and she was fine for me, if we got more of her, like exactly what you're saying. It's just we didn't get that much of her to begin with, so there wasn't really that time to form any sort of like emotional character connection with her. And if you've read Sunlit Man, you kind of already know what's going to happen, so you don't necessarily want to, depending on like the type of reader you are. Like I'm a very character focused reader who gets very attached to characters. So if I know something bad's going to happen to a character, I'm like, no, I'm not getting attached to you. And that definitely happened with Vienta, because I knew something bad was going to happen to her.
Yeah, I do.
It is wild to me. Just real quick, it is wild to me how often on this show we've said, hey, this book would have been better if we had just had more of this thing. If this book had been 1,800 pages,
but also if we had less of that thing. Like,
yeah. So keep the length, remove all the things that we don't like, add all the things that we like, and the book is going to be great.
It's true.
Yeah, but, yeah, I feel like Jess is onto something, because we know that Sigzil gets a new spren eventually, because we know that Vienta is not Orcs, so it did kind of, I think part of why I didn't really attach to Vienta is because like there was this thought in the back of my head of like, this is the placeholder spren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, with all the new spren types that we saw in Wind and Truth, placeholder spren might be one of them.
Yeah. It's a tough bar to overcome, especially because Ox is so charismatic and he has such a bond with Sigzil in Sunlit Man, that it is hard to not kind of compare them in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I just disliked a lot of the math stuff so much that it kind of soured me on a lot of her other scenes. And I mean, you talked about like, oh, it would have been kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, like the things that you guys are saying, like the things we like about Vienta were the, quiet moments when she's not just in battle acting as a calculator. Like,
that's a fair assessment, yeah.
Mm-hmm. How did we feel about the sacrifice? With Sigzil breaking his bond and killing, and making her a Deadeye instead of letting her be killed. Because we've said and I've said I'm like, oh, if he had a big failure, that would have been a good moment. And you can look at this like a really big failure, but for some reason, it just is not. It was not terribly impactful to me.
Yeah, I think this is just
failure.
This would be a good scene in a better plotline.
I don't think this was a failure because what else was he going to do? There wasn't any other option.
Yeah.
It was that, or she was going to die anyway.
Yeah.
And at least this way she still gets to live in some capacity.
Yeah.
And I think it's also undercut really, really badly by the fact that we have this happen 3 times in this book where different people renounce their oaths to their spren. And this is definitely the worst of the 3 times, and it really showed.
Yeah, I agree with you on this one.
I do think actually for me, this was probably my favorite moment in the Sigzil scenes. I did not really like a lot of the Sigzil combat stuff, which was a lot of his plot. But this scene, I think, I agree that I think I would have liked it more if it was a character in Spren that I had stronger feelings for. I liked the idea of breaking the bonds and making the shard blades has been this thing that has hung over the Spren Radiant bond for so long. And now there is this character making the choice to do it again in order to save his Spren's life. And even though he did, she didn't really forgive him for it. I found that really interesting and a very sort of honest way of portraying that sort of situation, which I liked a lot. I just didn't necessarily care about Sigzil and Vienta as part of it.
Evgeni mentioned earlier that Vienta talks a lot about the idea of not existing, and it makes her reaction to Sigzil's choice make a lot of sense in the way that she seems to have this fear of it, and by what he did, she has lost part of herself because of something that he has done against her wishes, and part of her doesn't quite exist anymore. And it just wasn't something I had thought of until you mentioned it.
Yeah, that was David, but it's interesting because my read was the exact opposite. To me, she is as understanding as she is, because she doesn't forgive him, but she doesn't she's like, hey, let's just go our separate ways, whatever. She's not holding a grudge. He's not hunting them down or anything like that. To me, that is because in renouncing his oaths, he did save her from oblivion. She was put in coma for 15 minutes, but he did save her from oblivion, which is the thing that she was freaking out about.
Does that soft establish that the shard blades are invulnerable to the anti-investiture, which I think was something that never probably answered in the book? I mean, at least Sigzil thought that they might.
Shallan is worried about it with her plate, but that's also never
Yeah.
She
thinking that.
She doesn't want to experiment.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, it's it is a strong scene on its own, and it does build up in a way on what has come before with the Vienta character. But how do I explain this? The reason it doesn't work for me is because of what we've brought up over and over again with relation to the Sigzil plotline, in that it's hard to call it a personal failing or a bad ending or a bad decision when Sigzil simply does not get other decisions, other options. It's not like there was a choice and he chose wrongly. Maybe this is me misremembering how this went in the book, but the scene where Moash just comes in and ruins everyone's day always felt like it came a bit out of nowhere for me. Hurry up, we need to get this big bad moment of to break Sigzil's bond with Vienta, throw Moash at it. So I guess it just kind of feels maybe not like contrived, but forced in a way. Like it didn't feel like a natural moment to me of like this whole plot line led up to this moment, more like, oh, suddenly this is what we're doing now.
I had the same feeling.
I would say it's not out of nowhere because we do see Moash come to the Shattered Plains. Like he pops out of the Else Gate, and so like this gun is hanging on the mantle. It's not exactly like the arc doesn't build towards him showing up, but it's the moment he pops up out of the Else Gate, we know there's going to be a confrontation somewhere.
Well, it's the second time he's shown up because he shows up and he kills Leighton in that other scene where we get the scholar with the sphere of prophecy. So I think that I think it's been established that he's there. In my mind, like the failure aspect of it is just the kind of thing that anybody does in a tragedy where you're like, oh, if I'd been hovering 10 feet to the right, I wouldn't have been in the zone and I wouldn't have fallen and, and then my friend would be alive, like that sort of stuff. And I think what kind of muddles it a little bit for me is I don't think that all these things are problems inherent in the Sigzil plotline, but just that sometimes other things going on other plotlines kind of redound to not to its benefit, in that like he sacrifices Vienta, but in the other plotline, Mishram is being released. So even in that moment, it's not clear, or she's about to, I don't know exactly how they fall. But it's not clear like what even the consequences of this are going to be. They're not even clear cut, so you're just kind of like, all right, so I guess she's going to be fine. And then you do get that confirmed, but there's not even obviously she's a blade for a period of time, but it is just a little bit,
the impact of it is like, because the moment is, I think it's sold as like a big, and like, if we forget about all the Mishram stuff, right? Let's pretend the dead eyes were not getting fixed in this book or ever. Then this becomes a much more interesting and like gut-wrenching choice of, especially if, which hasn't happened, but like if you establish like a close relationship between like imagine this was Kaladin and Syl, right? And then Kaladin makes a choice of, I will put Syl in a coma because I don't want her to get completely obliterated. Like that is potent. And so I think there was the idea that this was meant to be a little bit of the, obviously, you're never going to reach the Kaladin Syl level in what is effectively a secondary, if not a tertiary character. But like the shape of it was the same, right? But we have the Mishram stuff. She gets freed a day later. So like that undermines a lot of it. I agree with you.
I am kind of curious if her arm came back or not, because she did get her arm blown off by the anti-light. So, I'm not sure if that comes back or not when you get healed as a Deadeye.
Good question.
Yeah, and I guess for me, the idea of, I know we talked a lot about like, oh, this wasn't like, what else could Sigzil have done in this moment? Like, this wasn't necessarily a personal failure. I think for this particular scene, that doesn't bother me as much, because the idea that Sigzil did everything right, he saved her life, but it was still a breach of trust. It was still something that irrevocably ruins their relationship, is what's interesting about this sort of on a personal level. But I understand that sort of with the full context of the Shattered Plains kind of being similar and the expectations coming in from Sunlit Man that he would have a sort of personal failure, that kind of, plus the fact that their relationship wasn't the strongest and most interesting one in the first place kind of sours a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think it's also a little lacking in like the falling action department, because like, if I remember right, we do get this like, oh, she contacted him and said like, I understand what you did, but let's not meet again.
Yeah.
But I think it's like as narration, as like, this is a thing that has happened already by the time we're back in Sigzil's head. So I think this scene would be like retroactively stronger if we actually saw this conversation. Like maybe instead of like Sigzil is thinking about this when Hoyt comes in have the scene open at Sigzil and Vienta like talking and about parting ways, and then Hoyt steps in. Like not make it a narration, that just a summary of a moment that should have been emotional to Sigzil.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I think we needed to actually see the moment between them of her saying that she wanted to part ways for it to have that emotional sting at the end, instead of it just being something that Sigzil reminisces about afterwards.
And I think that the other kind of piece of this ending that was interesting and that had some elements that I enjoyed was the latent death rattle, where, you know, he essentially, because Moloch is on the Shattered Plains, we learn, has a death rattle where he sees himself as Sigzil essentially losing to Moash. And so that is like a thing that is hanging over him kind of for the second half of the plotline, and sort of knocks him off his trajectory of where he's feeling pretty good about being a leader, you know, where he suddenly has this prophecy of doom over him, telling him he's going to fail and that his friend is going to die. So how did people feel about that? Was that interesting to folks, or how successful did we think that was as kind of a plot element?
And in the interest of, because I think the wording of the death rattle is notable in some ways. I just want to read that real quick.
Yeah.
It says, "I die, the scholar with a spear. I die by the hands of a friend. My friend screams in death, and I know that I have failed to lead. I am no captain. I am nothing. Fire strikes me, and my eyes burn." And the reason I wanted to read this is because I think this is a shockingly straightforward and like clear death rattle. There is no ambiguity to this, right?
Moelach is no longer messing around.
This is so the night will reign, for the choice of honor is life.
Maybe it's a proximity thing. Like the closer you are to whoever you're having the death rattle about, the clearer you can see what is going on.
I don't know.
Moelach just said, you know, I'm not feeling in the mood for poetry today. This is what's happening to you.
I'm in no mood for poetry. Incredible.
Death rattles don't always come true, right? Like it's a potential future, but it's not the definite future.
Did we ever have like a death rattle that we know didn't come true?
Only this one.
I mean, I think this was the first.
This is the first. And
this fits perfectly with what happened with Sigzil, except for the fact that he didn't die.
Except he chose to like not to do this. Which is like, none of this is shocking, right? Because we see exactly the same situation with Renarin and Jasnah in Oathbringer, right? Renarin is seeing the equivalent of death rattles, right? He is seeing possible futures, and he hasn't been wrong so far, right? He saw the Everstorm. We think he may have seen Adolin's murder of Sadeas, other things. And so like he sees multiple futures in which Jasnah comes and kills him. And much like Sigzil decides not to do this, Jasnah decides not to do that. So like, yes, these are possible futures. In fact, they might be even likely futures. But this is notable because among the death rattles, this is the first one that doesn't come true.
Moelach does the non-poetic, like straightforward death rattle for the first time, and it just doesn't
work for him.
Yeah, Moelach needs to go back to poetry.
I think so. I will say, you know, as an aside, one of my least favorite death rattles ever because of that. I think it is just way too straightforward. Yeah, I love when he's a little clever about it. So not my favorite on that aspect. But I do think it's fun to meme about. But I also am like, you know, the death rattles we're going to get in the epigraphs, Brandon's not going to give us a bunch of death rattles that don't happen. You know, he's going to give us the ones that turned out to be right. Yes. You know, because he wants to foreshadow stuff. So I think there are likely other death rattles that do not come true that we do not see occur, you know,
or at least that we don't recognize them, right?
Yeah, I really disliked this death rattle for a lot of the reasons people have already said. I think it is way too specific, and It's just generally just not super, interesting to read. Like, oh, this person is basically screaming out, Sigzil, you're gonna be killed by Moash soon. Like, I don't really like it.
One thing I want to, and this is not new, so I don't know why it is pinging off my radar, but the point of view of the death rattles is interesting to me, because like this is clearly written as if it is Sigzil speaking, right? I die, the scholar with a spear. I die by the hands of a friend, like, and like all it takes is a quick gander through the death rattles list page on the Coppermind, and a lot of them are, if not all of them are, from like a first person perspective, right? You've killed me, bastards, you've killed me while the sun is still hot, I die. One of the other new one that we got in this book, I climb the wall of grief towards the light, locked away above, and so I'm going to save this for a death rattle episode, but the mechanics of how Moloch does this are intriguing to me. Perhaps even more so, because like with a lot of the others, I think you can imagine like a non-existent like entity, that exists either in the vision or is just like, I'm cold, mother. Why can't I still hear the rain? That doesn't have to be a real child, that can be just a vision like manifesting as the perception of a child of this new Everstorm, stuff like that. But this is not some unnamed like spiritual puppet. Like this is a known character's POV, which is intriguing.
Well, and he says like Leighton says, I see something. I see you. Storms, I am you. Like he's experienced, it's not even like I'm just seeing out of your eyes. He's like, I am you right now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
It's also, what's the other one? There's one from like the Way of Kings that's like, I see you, surgeon. I know what you're doing. I will not speak the truths that I see. That's always been fascinating to me.
I also think part of why I dislike this one so much is because the capital S, the scholar with the spear title, has always felt very unearned to me. Like he sort of thinks about himself in those terms, but it's like we get similar things with Rennar and the Son of Thorns, which is just
Son of Thorns, Bridger of Minds.
The Bridger of Minds. But the idea of like, oh, you get like the title of a scholar with a spear just doesn't feel like he has necessarily done enough to sort of earn a title like that on page.
I can see that. It's also not like Renarin doesn't earn Son of Thorns, right? That's just inherent.
Yeah, but it's
I do like that the spiritual realm is kind of symbolic in this way, in that there's almost this thing where like people are almost roles, and this is going to be a little silly to say, but like people are almost more characters than they are people. So I get what you're saying.
Kind of archetypal sometimes.
Yeah. Archetypal is a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that I did like about this that I thought was fun, and I know has been played with in like another series, was Sigzil kind of doing that thing where he's like, well, I know how I'm gonna die, so like you're not it,
Yeah.
Like that was a fun kind of element to it, that he got to be he could be a little extra reckless, and
I do think that was which in hindsight, when the Death Rattle proved not to be true, was maybe not the best idea.
Nope.
But for a moment, he was the cool guy who did not look at explosions. I guess worth shouting out. He got a new chapter icon for this book, and it's a scholar. It's a scholar with a spear. So, I'm looking at the runtime of this episode, which for the 5th time in a row, I'm like, we're gonna struggle to do hour and a half. And listeners and viewers, you can see the timestamps. So we do need to talk about Sunlit Man at least a little bit. And I know that we've like jumped there a few times. We've alluded to events from Sunlit Man. We've like used context from like Sigzil's character in Sunlit Man to like inform our thoughts about his character in Wind and Truth. But I do think we should spend like a little bit of time talking about like essentially Nomad, right? The person Sigzil becomes after Wind and Truth. And whether you think that this personal failure that had been alluded to in Sunlit Man is earned or not, I think for the purposes of Nomad's or Zellian's character arc, we can just kind of assume that at least in his head, this was a significant failure that like has impacted him moving forward. Whether Wind and Truth presented it that way, we've talked about that before. We can push it off the table. So what happens? Sigzil leaves. Rasarr, like Hoyd shoves him through shoves the Dawn Shard onto him, shoves him through a perpendicularity. Sigzil traverses Shadesmar for a couple of months, finds the Iriali, I guess like world hopping, I mean not world hopping, but like Iriali caravan, where they are trying to escape as well. A bunch of Spren are also there, including Ox. I think. Do we see like regular Spren escape, or is it just
Ox mentions Windspren, I believe.
Okay.
Let's see. I can leave now. Any of us can. There are some in the caravan, even some Windspren and other smaller ones.
Okay, cool. So he sees all of that. He travels with the Iriali. This kind of fulfills the Sunlit Man thing, where he thinks that he has met, or he recalls that he has met Ox in a realm of like Obsidian or whatever, which we always assumed was Shadesmar, but we never quite understood how that could be possible because, you know, we didn't know how this book was going to end. And so he eventually, he travels multiple worlds. He explores more of his scholarly side and like the arcanist side of things. Eventually makes his way onto Cantico after like, the Dawn Shard at some point eats Ox. That's probably an important event. That
I think it's like also important to bring up that he has an entire like Skybreaker arc during this time gap between.
Oh, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to forget, given that, he doesn't act very Skybreaker-y in Sunlit Man. Because, let's be real, Brandon... Okay, I am not going to go on a screed about how Brandon fumbled the Skybreakers, but...
Okay.
Brandon's idea of a good Skybreaker seems to just be Windrunner Pro Max. So... in retrospect, now having read Wind and Truth, I am not surprised that Sigzil in Sunlit Man is just like a Windrunner with a different coat of paint.
We're not going to address that because we need to not do a Skybreaker episode right now. But yes, not only does he meet Ox, but the two of them do end up bonding. There's a part of me that finds it interesting that maybe it's possible to bond a Spren in Shadesmar. I don't know why I always assumed that like the human needs to be in the physical realm and the Spren needs to like walk through. But maybe that's not necessary. Maybe
I mean, they
both
could
leave
have done it
Shadesmar
in the physical realm too.
Yeah, and they do the thing. But anyway, so he becomes a Skybreaker. We have no idea what his oaths are and what they're all about. But
he probably went on a quest because he got to the fourth ideal.
He got to the fourth ideal. And not only did he get to the fourth ideal, but somehow, even though he never spoke the fourth ideal of the Windrunners, we know that his plate that he regains in the Sunlit Man is somehow a mixture of Windrunner, Windspren, and Gravitation Spren. So I guess some of those Windspren that were following the caravan were his plate. Like,
I mean, maybe.
or like there were Windspren that like in the wider Cosmere for it to later become his plate, I guess. I don't know.
He would have needed an honor sprint to like go back to the fourth ideal.
But he broke his oath. So I feel like in my mind, this is kind of what I feel like is he's got like a broken bond that's like hanging on to him. That was like almost for the fourth ideal. Like there are points where he's like he's pushing up against. He feels like he can almost grasp his weapon. He feels like he can almost grasp his power, just like Kaladin and Tef did.
I agree.
Rhythm of War. And so there's a part of me that wonders just like, okay, like he was kind of at that point. And then once he got to that same point as a Skybreaker, like he sort of just already, he had this enough of a connection that Windspren were also involved, you know, that you're just like, oh yeah, he's kind of still got this latent connection, which we see him utilize later when he's kind of got it's also a Skybreaker thing, but it's sort of the pressure stuff that he does, even though he has no powers. That he
pressure is not Skybreaker.
Oh, it's not. You're right. It's on the Bondsmith side. You're correct. Yeah. So like he's got little pieces that hang on.
You know, I just had like the silliest idea because like if, you know, because Nomad just keeps jumping from place to place. So does this mean that like every time what's the word they use? Skip?
Yes, he skips.
Every time he skips, like because like the armor sprint, they need to be physically on the location that overlaps with his. So does that mean every time he skips, there's like a bunch of armor sprint like left behind in the cognitive realm trying to figure out where they need to go to chase after him?
I have to assume that he just brings them with.
Yeah, just like Ox, you know, like it's not like Ox gets left behind.
It is really funny to me that they are just like running after him.
Yeah.
I mean, it would help explain how the Dust Brigade keeps finding him. They just look into the cognitive realm and look for a bunch of armor sprint just running in a direction.
Well, I agree that's a mystery. That is a weird one. I will say the context of this book, Hoy did nothing wrong. Hoy told him, he asked him, do you want to take this? I'm giving you the Dawn Shard. Will you take this Dawn Shard? And it's a bad idea for a Radiant to have it. And Sigzil took the Dawn Shard and he went and became a Radiant. Like, okay. Not a good call.
Hoy did a lot of things wrong. It was this one specific thing that he gave to Sigzil as advice that he didn't do wrong. No. There were a lot of wrong things that led him to that moment.
Okay, but no, you have to... The wrong things were in the past. Like yes, he completely mucked up the situation up to this point, right? And we are now at this point, and at this point, he made the best decision that he could.
Really, the theme of Sigzil's arc, at this point, he made the best decision that he could.
Yeah.
It does really ask the question, though, because if Sigzil got to at least the fourth ideal with the Skybreakers, how does that work if he's holding a Dawn Shard already? Did he give it back to Hoyd for a bit or give it to someone else when he first bonded Ox? Was it a slow progression that was destroying Ox that then rapidly sped up at the end?
I remember something in the Sunlit Man about that he used the Dawn Shard and that use of the Dawn Shard like ended up using Oaks as fuel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, it's like, not that there's inherently having bonds. So.
Yeah. The problem is the Dawn Shard can feed on any investiture, and if you're not careful, that investiture can be your spren.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was threatened, like it was defending itself. And
yes.
I assume he didn't have any other power. Like they were kind of at a point where it needed, like the only thing available was Ox. And so they were like, there you go.
And my theory is that this is the first time that he skipped. The Dawn Shard was like, I'm going to get us out of here. And I will eat your spread to do so.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is tied in with what Sigzil sees as his personal failing. And it's not just to do with what happened with Vienta in Stormlight 5, but it's stuff that happened in between then and Sunlit Man.
So I remember thinking something like that when I was reading Sunlit Man, right? Way before I knew anything about Wind and Truth. And I believe the way he talks about these events is as separate things. There is I am not good for leadership because of a thing that I failed. And then separate from that, it is, I let my best friend Ox down by letting the Dawn Shard eat it. Like these are two separate things that are weighing on him and have different effects on him, but I do think they're separate.
I do think you're right, though, that there could have been other like moments of like leadership failure in the past. Like I am very curious in the time he spent becoming an Arcanist, and that was I believe that's what he was doing, or like Arcanist is probably the wrong term. Becoming someone who is like knowledgeable about like magic engineering. Like it seems like he spent some time with some scholars, and that was what he was doing, if I recall correctly, the first time the Night Brigade approached him. And so I could easily see that not having gone very well for that particular group of scholars, that not being particularly a good moment as well.
Well,
he was potentially prominent there.
I think he approaches them, actually, if I remember correctly.
I don't think that's true.
Well, okay. We don't need to go into a research, right? But anyway, whatever. So all of that was to say, what do we think about his character in like as Noma and later on as Zellian? Like, because that to me feels like almost a different character from his Stormlight stuff, which makes sense. It is like decades at the very least, if not centuries since Stormlight.
I really like Nomad as a character, and like he's one of those characters that when his book ends, he left me with this thought of like, I want to see more of what he's up to, and I hope he'll show up in future books.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
doesn't.
Think he will.
I don't disagree with you on that. He doesn't feel quite Sigzil-y, which makes sense considering all the stuff he went through in that time since being Sigzil. So, but I really like what we do end up getting.
Question for you. Does he feel like a believable future version of Sigzil? Can you imagine Stormlight 5 Sigzil, like the arc between that and Sunlit?
Yes, I think like a few decades or centuries of being on the run would do that to Sigzil.
It really reminds me of Way of Kings, Sigzil, and his pessimism back then, and how that just seems to come out again in Sunlit Man, and it's just like a really big part of his personality and who he is. Like he's just so deep into the
He's not a happy boy.
He's not a happy boy. Like he's not a happy boy. And there was something that someone said earlier that just phrased it. It was phrased really well about like a lack of hope and how people shouldn't hope. And we get that back in Way of Kings with him pushing back against Kaladin. And he really has that same attitude in Sunlit Man.
Yeah, I can see him falling back to like, old habits is probably the wrong way to phrase, but like to the core of his personality, which is maybe a little bit detached, a little bit pessimistic.
I hope not. That would be sad. But no, I definitely agree with that, Jess. And I think that you see when he's doing better and he's in his more Zellian aspects, more of the other sides of his personality come out. Like he feels more like Sigzil as we see him in Rhythm of War. Maybe I'd probably say Rhythm of War in like the latter half of the book when he's doing a little more of his scholar stuff, trying to help them work out their problems, doing a little more like he's kind of, when he starts summoning his plate bag, he's getting all radiant-y again, like you see both sides of it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But definitely a layer of cynicism, like just burnt onto the top now that is pretty hard to get through.
That's what the torment is. That's, when it's described as, how is it described? Like a layer on his soul.
A canker.
A canker, yeah. That's actually, it's not a torment, it's just cynicism.
Well, maybe.
Do you guys think that any part of Sigzil was like a little bit annoyed when he found out that Kaladin got the storytelling thing from Hoy down immediately, like after being Hoy's storytelling apprentice.
I don't think he did. Strong disagree. I know people say that. I don't think Kaladin is a good storyteller, and I don't think the book is trying to tell you that he's a good storyteller.
I mean, he does end up like turning a herald over to their side by storytelling.
I don't think Kaladin deserves that credit. I think that is
there's a lot of
80% the wind. Not a Kaladin episode.
Anyway,
we don't need to talk about that. I do, but on Kaladin's note, I do want to like clock an interesting thing, which is when Nomad sees kind of a vision of Hoyd in Sunlit Man. And his immediate reaction is to like, he thinks he's seeing Kaladin, which questionable, but it's the middle of the night. It's very dark, rainy. You're seeing a uniform. Maybe you can make that mistake. But do we think Sigzil knows like what's going on with Kaladin?
No.
I have no idea.
Does he think he's just dead?
I think it depends on the time span. If it's been decades, maybe not at that point. If it's been centuries, then I think he knows what's going on with Kaladin. Whether Kaladin's still a herald and alive is a completely different question. But without knowing what the timeline actually is in this case, it's really hard to put things together in terms of what he does and doesn't know. But the fact that he did think it was Kaladin, and now that we know that Kaladin is a herald and is still alive, that changes how that scene comes across, I think, versus beforehand where it was a big question mark of, well, will Kaladin live? Will he not live? Before we got Stormlight 5.
This also frames the comment of, he's got people who still love him back on Rasarr. That makes sense with the time skip.
That's exactly like what I was going to say.
Sorry.
That like, because it was like this big question mark back when the preview chapters for Sunlit Man came out. Like, why is he thinking about Kaladin? What is the reasonable time span this story could take place in if Sigzil's first thought is, Kaladin is still around. But now that we know that Kaladin is an immortal herald, that does rather change things up a bit in terms of like how the scene comes across and how much time could have feasibly passed since between Stormlight and Sunlit Man. I still don't think he probably doesn't know that Kaladin suddenly became like a better storyteller. I think it's... I don't know if he like... I don't think Sigzil and Kaladin have met since Sigzil left Rasarr.
Yeah, the timeline is really the big question. I hope it's been centuries. I feel like Brandon is not interested in an overly long, like I feel like we're accelerating technology. Like you look at Scadrial, we're accelerating technology and how fast it's happening, not going slowly, Is there a line where someone tells Jasna, maybe it's another death rattle, that she's like gonna be on a ship that's... no, that's
you were
from
thinking
Story
of
Deck.
Lorietta
and Story Deck. Oh, we can't talk about that then, can we? That's outside our spoiler policy. Or is that part of our...
we had a full ass episode on
I guess we had a full ass episode. There's a line in there where this little fortune teller child tells Jasna that she's gonna be on a ship that's not a ship, or something along those lines. Which kind of makes me feel like I'm like, is Jasna going to be around? Like, is they going to have space travel when Jasna's around? Like, is that the kind of ship she's talking about?
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean...
Oh, yeah, because we were talking about the USS Jasna or whatever.
Yeah, so it could be not that far. It could be decades. Like, it actually, in my mind, it's maybe not out of the question. Maybe Jasna becomes an immortal planet governor. Like, we know that's on the table.
I've always said that Jasna will either die in the back half or become like an immortal world hopper, and there is no in between. So if she has been told directly that she'll be on a ship that's not a ship, I think that probably does not put much stock in the timeline, because there are lots of ways to become immortal if you can get your way into Shadesmar, and I think that Jasna, if she survives the back half, has a very high chance of that happening to her.
That's totally fair. Yeah.
I will say, like, it's fun to get like some characters in the future story arcs, but I'm not sure how I feel about this sensation of like
all the main characters become
just a greatest of compilation of Cosmere characters.
Brandon picking up his A-listers and just putting them in space opera like Mistborn.
It should take more than a few decades, because like if you want to have a very colonized and like well-traveled universe, a galaxy, then you need a little more than a few decades to do that.
Yeah, but that's a problem for the future, I think.
Future Brandon and future us.
Nervous laughter. Let's do kind of a final round of last thoughts that we may have, and then we're gonna wrap up this episode. Are there any things from anywhere throughout this episode that we felt like we either didn't touch on enough or didn't touch at all, or we just kind of, did you think of the perfect comeback 2 hours later and you want to make sure that it's heard?
I think that Sigzil's "Am I a jock or am I a nerd?" debate was done better in a lot of other media. That is not
truly
Stormlight.
The scholar with the spear truly is the jock who's a nerd, or the nook who's you were not wrong about that.
That is a good point. I guess like at the end of this, I'm just kind of left, I didn't expect this plotline in this book. I actually just really didn't think that Sigzil was going to be in it this much. And I didn't think that I kind of thought we might get like a wink at the Dawn Shard, but I really just did not expect much of this at all in this book, And so it definitely came as a surprise to me. And like up to the point where he started talking about, okay, well, I got to do a Sigzil plotline. And then I was like, oh, okay, yes, we're getting that. I wonder, like, if less is more, if this was necessary. And it makes me a little nervous sometimes for other like big off-screen moments that like I've built up in my head. Like if they appear on screen, like how will they come across? Will I enjoy them, or are they more satisfying in implication, which is something Brandon's talked about. Like I think he talked about some of the Sigzil stuff as potentially never appearing on screen, maybe the Dawn Shard scene or whatnot. And so, if there's a moment like what exactly happened with Vienta and Nightblood and Vasher, like, will that be cool if we see it on screen, or is it better in kind of existing off screen? It's something I wonder about a little more.
I had a thought earlier about like this was way back at the beginning when we were talking actually when Alla did the overview of Sigzil's life and was talking about Bridge 4 and Sigzil's like pushing back against Kaladin and lack of hope type thing. I think it's all Hoid's fault. I think the whole dumping him on the Shattered Plains and then disappearing so that he ended up in the bridge cruise. I think Sigzil's attitude was kind of fair in the end. And I think Hoid is to blame.
Not
a very good monster.
What was that line in Sunlit Man about Hoid abandoning?
I was thinking of that too.
Like the events of Alethkar.
Oh yeah, that was. Did he say Alethkar? Does it say Alethkar?
Yeah.
That's okay. See, that is confusing. I thought something was going to happen with Alethkar.
Yeah.
Maybe something does happen with Alethkar.
Maybe he thinks of like the Shattered Plains as Alethkar because it kind of technically is, but
no, they had a treaty, but they never did it. They never signed the treaty.
Well, no, that's before, right? That's I'm saying like, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, Rhythm of War era, Shattered Plains is Alethkar.
I get that, but like, would Hoid say that? Does anybody really talk about the Shattered Plains? Like, oh yeah, back on Alethkar.
Well, I mean,
the Shattered Plains, obviously.
Yeah.
So territory.
I know there's at least a line of someone, maybe Adolin, thinking like, "Oh, the Shattered Plains is the Alethi seat of power."
Yes. Yeah. Like technically speaking, it is, but it's just a weird way of anyway.
Yeah.
So Sunlit Man. Like the meeting between Nomad and Hoid. Hoid says, I never did get a chance to apologize for events in Alethkar. Well, it's not like you had the opportunity to, Nomad says, after frequently talking to my superior officer, asking him to pass messages to me. after living together in the same city for years and never stopping by, you left me to rot.
Okay. Potential explanation that I think actually is possibly valid.
Yeah.
Is what they were split up because it's not that necessarily that Sigzil was dumped in the bridge cruise. He tried to kill. I think he tried to kill someone, and Hoyd thought he was dead. And so that's what happened. And so Hoyd believed Sigzil to be dead until he saw him in the bridge cruise. And I think potentially that happened in Alethkar. Sigzil tried to kill somebody. He was punished, put into slavery for that, and dragged out to the Shattered Plains, just like plenty of other people were.
Very much like Kaladin.
To fuel the bridge crew. Just like Moash, Moash was brought out there, I believe, right? Or was that the result of something else? I can't remember. No, he went out for something. He didn't go out as a prisoner, I don't think. But anyway, that's my theory. That's what I think happened in Alethkar. And then he's saying, well, you never apologized to me directly, but you gave Kaladin plenty of messages to say, oh, he's a graduated world singer now. Oh, tell Sigzil this.
Oh, okay.
Sigzil that. But he didn't talk to him or engage with him until that final moment there. That's how I'm reading it now, at least.
Okay.
So maybe that's what Alethkar is.
To me.
Yeah. Maybe that's something we just need to like look into at some point, but like for within the scope of this episode, that feels like a satisfying line of thinking. For myself, I will say that I'm thankful for Sigzil's arc or Sigzil's story, because we got one of our two little glimpses of Dagon Arthas, whom much like Eric is unreasonably obsessed with his Eldritch girlfriend, I am unreasonably obsessed with mine. I am highly intrigued by the whole idea of I as Odium am willing to pay the price for that So like, I think there is something there. I think there's something very interesting and huge there. We didn't get to see it in this book because we are kind of doing the first half of, okay, a contract has been made, a price will be paid. We're now going to do the lame stuff, which is an oath gate, even though it's like a huge oath gate and stuff like that. Later down the line, there will be the consequence. We are in the...
That will be due.
Yeah, we are in the F around phase. The find out phase is coming later. Mm-hmm. So, or at least I hope that is the case. It's possible. So that's where I am with Dagon Arthas.
I know. I just think like all the unmade got a real downgrade in this book. Like I still remember when they were Eldritch Abominations that were like a big event when they appeared back in Oathbringer, and now it's like they got like either off-screened or they are just
we literally killed
device, or they just don't do anything.
We literally killed Yalagnar off screen, didn't we?
Hey, he took out Plateau 3. It didn't matter. But, they could have dropped him on the main plateau. But anyway.
Anyway, let's end.
Was there a second Dagon Arthas appearance, though? Or was it... You said there was one of two. Or are you talking about when they had the Odium interlude conversation?
When they had the conversation earlier with like L. Yeah. So, or at least it was L. Anyway, so that's... I think we're going to end this episode here. Or at least we're going to end the on-topic part of this episode here.
On topic.
It
was very on topic most of the time.
That is true. We didn't even do the whole...
on the rails.
We didn't even talk about a die-in. Can you imagine that?
Who's a die-in? Is that the...
That's the Elantris.
No, that was the idea I sort of mentioned in chat, that I felt like the way Vienta was written sometimes reminded me of the way he was written in terms of just like spouting the correct numbers.
Yeah.
I'd still like to imagine how he knew how many steps it was across the ocean. I'm like, was he walking the whole time, like on the deck? Like, I don't know. That must have just been crazy.
Anyway, so that's going to be that. However, before we go into who's that Cosmere character, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the episode and do introductions. No, just kidding. We'll do show and tell. Jess, you have show and tell for us. Show us and tell us.
Yes. So I forgot when show and tell was meant to happen in the episode. So I'm doing show and tell at the very, very end.
And I'm a bad host.
To show the date of when we recorded this episode, because it will come out not at all near this time, but JordanCon just happened, and we all recently just got back from it. And I was at a stall for the person who created the Gallifreyan language for Doctor Who, and was able to pick up this really gorgeous life before death art.
Oh,
which is real nice. And I thought
It's
I
very
would
nice.
show it off.
that does look very
so
good.
Unfortunately, I cannot find the name of the artist, but I know that her Etsy is Circle Studio, but it is spelled SIRKLES Studio. So it's not exactly the way you would think to spell it. But yeah, she has some gorgeous things. There was also this one, which is very Doctor Who themed.
That is extremely
People are-
reflective.
Oh.
I can see the base pretty well, though. It's just the text. It's hard to see.
Yeah, it's more the base I'm trying to show off. So there's that one. And yeah, she sells little kits if people want to learn how to write their name in Gallifreyan, and she wrote out mine and it looked awesome. But yeah, I really like that Life Before Death, so I decided that was worth buying.
It looked very nice.
Archie just bought one online.
Well, I'm trying to find the artist. Like I see,
found her website, but I don't see her name anywhere.
yeah, and like I know there are people at the con who like told me her name because like we like talked about her.
Yeah, she does
Okay.
custom things as well if people want custom artwork done.
Very nice, very nice.
Mhm.
Yeah, GermanCon was a blast. I will say
It
so.
was-
This was mentioned like while we were at the con, by the way, but it's fully possible that you may have not seen it because it's kind of niche. So we were supposed to have, or we were going to have like a meet and greet Shardcast panel because we didn't want to do any content. And what it ended up turning into was, hey, remember that bottom mission page in the interior art of Wind and Truth, where there seems to be like writing along the edges of that? We were like, hey, what if instead of meet and greet, we decode what this thing says? And we did. We had a lot of fun. And if you didn't see that mentioned in the Discord, and if we haven't updated the Coppermind, which we probably haven't, the text around the bottom mission piece says, "The child of light and music." So that's my show and tell. And now I think we are gonna go and find out who's that Cosmere character.
This character is from Rasarr.
Menace, Tien,
Tom,
Braze.
Void in drag on a horse. It's time for Who's That Cosmere Character? Caw.
All right, everyone, you know what time it is. You send an email to wtcc@17shard.com with 5 clues on the character those clues correspond to. I read each one aloud, and after each one, our panelists get the chance to guess who's that Cosmere character. Let's begin. So first, I will be reading this priority Q1, sent in by Connor the Blue Wizard.
The Blue Wizard? Is that like
Clue
the
1.
one from Lord of
That's
the
where they went.
Rings? That's where they went. Oh, one brain cell.
Clue 1. This character is probably dead.
Uh-oh.
What about Theopolis from Silence
I mean, I think he's for sure dead.
the Story? Well, but he might be a shade, though. Maybe he came back as a shade.
That's true. Yeah, okay, fair.
He's probably dead. Maybe
Yeah, I
it
guess to the
Theopolis?
question of what's dead.
Well, it's dead.
It is not Theopolis.
True Shardcast moment.
Yeah. you gotta
First
do
question,
something
first clue. What is dead? I'm gonna guess the original Hoyd.
big.
It is not the original Void.
Listeners, if you don't know, Hoyd stole the name Hoyd from his master.
I'm gonna say
That's what like Lara
doesn't-
Partnell stuff, right?
Spook.
Mhm.
She doesn't have a name, but Frost's sister, the lawyer dragon.
It is not Frost's sister.
Okay.
Spook.
It is Spook.
Wow.
Sorry, it took me a second to like process that you got it correct, Jess.
Okay.
Nice.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess. Have a good one, everyone.
Well, we have one regular. We're gonna do one regular.
I
As
know.
well.
I know.
Oh, what are
Well,
the other clues for the spook one?
Yeah, hold on. I'm O'Brien. Clue 2. This character really could have used a therapist. Clue 3. This character was a capable fighter. Clue 4. This character has parental issues. Clue 5. This character was a uniquely powerful invested art user.
All of
I
those are
love how
true.
this is like leading you to Kaladin.
It is leading you to Kaladin, doesn't it? Yeah. I got
Mm.
I got a little bit of that too.
Yeah, definitely all those other clues I would not have guessed Spook for. Just like that first one, I was like, yeah, I don't know this person.
Hey, if the shoe fits, right?
Yep.
That's true. That's a good one.
And she
Okay.
did.
Well,
Hey,
thanks, Blue Wizard. Grace, give us
got you
another
this
one.
time.
We are hungry for
Okay.
the wtcc.
This character was sent in by Natpin.
Not bad.
Clue 1. This character is from Rasarr.
When was this
Vienta.
sent?
This was sent May 2024.
Okay.
I'm still guessing Vienta.
It is not Vienta.
This character is from Rasarr. I want to guess someone fun.
I'm gonna guess Venley. She's
It
fun.
is not Venley.
I am gonna guess Yanagon.
It is not Yanagon.
I almost forgot his like free emperor name.
Cox.
Gox. Yeah.
I kind of forget Yanagon, honestly. I still call him Cox.
Mm. Wind and Truth turned me around on that because like they always call him Yanagon in this one, and so like that's fresh.
Yeah, yeah. It was more than like he got a lot of Emperor before too, which made it hard for the new name to stick.
Yeah.
Nomad.
It is not Nomad.
Very topical.
Clue 2. This character has died.
Oddly enough,
Has died. not
Yanagon still
necessarily
works.
dead. Has died, not necessarily is dead.
Death doesn't stick, does it?
Evie.
Not in the Cosmere.
It is not Evie.
Boy, I was gonna guess Tan of Aston. That was gonna be wrong. Zeth.
It is not Zeth.
Damn it.
What about Leshwi? She's died plenty.
It is not Leshwi.
Maya.
It is not Maya. Clue 3. This character is not human.
Oh.
I think you may have been on the right track with the Maya.
Testament?
It is not Testament.
Okay. We are running out of dead eyes.
What about Captain Eco's dad?
Is that your guess?
Yeah.
No, wasn't that no. You're thinking of Tambur's grandfather, no?
Well, Tambur's grandfather is Captain Eco's dad, right? Because
Oh wait, that's how that works.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm an idiot.
It is not Captain Aiko's dad.
Damn.
Or Tambur's
Well, okay, but
grandfather.
can I guess? Yes.
Raboniel.
It is not Raboniel.
I don't know, L.
It is not L.
Fortunately, there's a lot of fused we can guess, so
Yeah.
Clue 4. This character has a child.
Not human, has died from Rasarr, has a kid.
Yeah.
What about Notam's? What about Notam's dad?
It's not Nodom's dad.
Damn. All right.
Man,
I'm gonna get it next time.
Rabonio is still such a good guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Upsetting.
I was going
Well,
to guess something, but then
It's
that
not.
would
It's not
rely
the
on
Storm
my
Father.
winning truth.
Yeah. The timeline doesn't work.
Sibling?
It is not the sibling. I might actually give a slightly different final clue because I kind of realized reading them afterwards that the 5 clues as given are not actually great. So
Okay.
I will give an altered final clue that's different from
Okay.
the one sent in.
Sure.
I'm just trying to think of people who aren't human who have children.
Yeah.
That's why I'm locked in on this friend. I'm like, does Blended have a dad?
Blended's dad. Lucentia's dad.
And we don't know like any other like parent-child relationships in the Fuse. Like that is a tough thing.
Yeah,
Or at
I
least
mean,
we don't
like
know much
maybe,
about it. Like there
maybe-
maybe been like, oh, I had a kid. Yeah. But
yeah.
But I don't think so. Like Abidi didn't have any kids. That doesn't seem right.
And
Also,
this is
Stormlight.
sent in before Stormlight 5 as
Yeah.
well, so it wouldn't be a BD.
I'm gonna guess a weird Rubonio's mom.
It is not Ruboniel's mom.
I'm going to skip this round. I have no idea.
You can guess Rubonio's grandmother.
It's on the table. You can just have that
Yeah.
one.
Give that one for free. Yeah, if you're skipping anyway.
Sure, Robernio's grandmother.
It is Ruboniel's grandmother.
Damn it!
Oh my god!
Really? Yes. The last clue was
funny.
this character is related to an antagonist. I was going to change it to this character witnessed a historical event because I didn't think you guys were going to get it from that.
Oh my god, that is hilarious.
Don't even remember this character existing.
She is mentioned once by Raboniel as having witnessed the humans arriving on Rasarr.
And she actually appears in
Wow.
Stormlight 5.
Yeah.
That's really funny. Thanks for the point, guys.
I
That's great.
appreciate how this person sent in. They're like, well, she either died normally or she became refused and died anyways. So
That-
she
that was-
has
yeah.
died at least once.
That was actually my rationale for guessing Rubonio's mother.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
God damn it.
That is wonderful.
God damn
That's so funny.
Yeah. Go Jess. A victorious WTCC for you.
Look, I never win these things, so I'm proud of myself. Of taking your answer.
I guess, thanks for coming. Whatever. You have witnessed an event, much like Rubonio's grandmother. Sorry. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We never say this, but I don't do intros much like I don't do outros or vice versa. So, thanks for being here. If you are a regular, thanks for being a regular. We appreciate you. You are also either handsome or beautiful, depending on your preference, and intelligent. I know this for a fact. If you are new to the channel, you are also all of these things, but thanks for coming. We'd like to have you here. If you are interested in what we do, obviously, YouTube channel or whatever podcast feed, you have our options. We occasionally use Blue Sky as our preferred social media platform, although most of what you're going to see there is going to be art and our video feed, which is, not a bad thing, right? You're probably not looking for hot takes from us. You're looking for pretty things. So we've got you covered. If you'd like to support us monetarily, our Patreon starts at as little as $1 a month, and that gets you through the door for suggesting like art commissions for the future, and also voting on polls on what we are gonna do. I believe this month's poll is going to be related to Adolin for the third time. So I think we are realizing that if Adolin is anywhere near an option for the polls, he is going to win. Although in this case, it's his horse that's winning. So
Well,
that's
Adeline is near his horse usually.
that is true. Yes. So we are learning a lesson there. But you can join us. You can vote for these things. And then obviously, if you go to higher tiers, you get a little bit more, but a little bit. So that's going to be the end of the episode. We are going to see you. I mean, I guess we're not going to see you because we are a video, but you're going to see us next time. This has been Shardcast. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, give us a like. Bye again.
Cool.